To all the comic book nerds out there, this one's for you. The federal government is trying out a new approach when it comes to rooting out disinformation. Comic books. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA, unveiled a new series called Real Fake to tackle disinformation ahead of the November election. Take a look.
Follow protagonists Rachel and Andre as they travel the world and expose a vast network, manipulating content and pushing American voters to the brink. With elections coming up, will they be able to follow the trail of deepfakes and synthetic media and stop the real assailants from causing chaos, confusion, and division?
But the government's creative war on disinformation isn't impressing everyone, least of all some conservative hardliners. Republican Senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul, says, quote, DC Comics won't be adding these taxpayer-funded comic books to their repertoire anytime soon. Meanwhile, GOP Congressman from North Carolina, Dan Bishop, said they are creepy. But any CISA Comics critics may feel relieved to know that the series has fallen on deaf ears, not because they might be a little corny, but as The Intercept's Ken Klippenstein reports, few people even noticed them. This story is incredible. I think that a lot of claims of kind of government excess are silly. This one is spot on, largely because it is ineffective. And one of the critics of it in the Klippenstein piece in The Intercept, which I encourage folks to read, one of the critiques is that there's not enough of a gap between this as a propaganda piece and the propaganda it's supposed to be teaching people about for it to have any plausibility whatsoever.
It's also just funny to hear the government basically propping themselves up as the fighters against disinformation when they are often the worst purveyors of it, right? I mean, you had the FBI open an entire investigation based on Russian misinformation into the former president and used it to obtain FISA warrants to spy on members of his campaign and then continue to investigate him 3 years into his first term in office. I mean, it's just so, the irony is so rich, it's infuriating, actually.
I mean, one thing this notes is that apparently some thought went into this and the use of comics as a medium because they're a lot more popular than I understood them to be. Apparently more paper in Japan is used for manga books than is used for toilet paper. Comic novels are third in sales by genre, only behind general fiction and romance novels. And because they're so popular among young readers in particular, I think the effort was to target a base that was maybe influenceable and would grow up to have internalized these good lessons from the government. But the article points out that almost nobody watched this and that the clip that we showed had like only a few thousand views on YouTube compared to the hundreds of thousands of views that trailers for other graphic novels attract.
It definitely seems pretty insidious that they are intentionally targeting this to a younger demographic when, as you mentioned, previous attempts to police disinformation by the government have not gone over well because they did it in such a brazen way that it was noticed. This, luckily for them, went unnoticed for quite some period of time, but The Intercept, of course, previously reported about the Department of Homeland Security's attempts to police what they call disinformation. They had hired this woman who was all over TikTok spreading her own disinformation, claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation itself, that it was basically created and trafficked by the Russians in order to take down the Biden administration. And then I wish we would have talked about this more during our Ukraine discussion earlier, but there was the 60 Minutes segment recently on Havana Syndrome,
right,
where they sort of reprised these claims that the Russians are also responsible for that. They have some amazing acoustic software that no one's ever heard of that's able to cause traumatic brain injury, despite there being no external injuries that would surely result from such a device. And conveniently, of course, this report is brought out as the Ukraine aid bill is languishing in Congress. And tons of experts have said that the only consistency with these Havana Syndrome reports is that they're likely psychosomatic.
Including government reports. That was part of what was so fascinating about the story. I think we covered it last week or earlier this week, that the government was kind of pushing two messages at the same time. One from, I think it was the CDC, was saying, you know, there's no substantiation for there to be any kind of there. And on the other hand, you have this resurgence that was bolstered largely by the centrist media class of saying, no, actually, this is Russian disinformation. I mean, on the question of Russian disinformation, it is interesting that these people seem to not get why, to the extent that there was some effort to influence American politics, it was more effective than a comic book written by ops. And that is that to the extent that there was messaging that was advantageous to Russia insofar as it was oppositional to Biden, if you believe that sort of thing, it was picking up on genuine discontent in the American public. So I remember being asked once when I was working for the Bernie campaign what I felt about misinformation that was targeting Black people with the idea that the American government had treated them poorly. And I said, what's the question? Are you disputing the underlying claim? If you want that misinformation to not be, if you want to make it misinformation, you got to treat Black people well. That's the only way to make it anything other than a truthful statement. The Bernie campaign did not like that I answered the question in that way. But I think it's very true. And you're seeing it now, I think, with the effort to ban TikTok, to the extent that they're frustrated that young people are sharing all of these images coming out of Gaza by independent reporters that aren't being picked up on the mainstream news and are coming to different conclusions about whether this is a just war on the basis of that imagery. You can combat it by actually ending a war, addressing the fundamental concerns, but claiming that that is somehow a Chinese hoax and Chinese misinformation and trying to ban the app altogether, I think really misses the point.
Yeah, and I support the TikTok ban for different reasons, but it is notable that the person who introduced this bill, Mike Gallagher, is now leaving Congress early, reportedly to go work at Palantir, which has been one of the loudest advocates for banning TikTok, precisely for the reasons that you laid out.
Yeah. All right. I'm curious to see if any of you have read this comic. If you have, please do report back in the comments and join us back tomorrow on Rising. We'll have another great show for you. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who prefer to listen while you're on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Take care.